a dream told me that like this was the relationship I was going to be in for the rest of my life, and I was like, that's a good dream. I would like to live out that dream, and so we are.
What makes you choose to take your dreams so seriously?
But we're talking about lucid dreaming, and he was like, I have gotten so good at lucid dreaming that I don't want to lucid dream anymore. If you truly have maximal power, the actual most powerful thing you can do is give power away. I would literally come home every single day and there would be people sitting on my porch dealing drugs. I remember calling my dad one time that I was there, and there was like some shit going on in the front yard. And I call my dad and I'm like, do I call the police? Like, what? He's like, do not fucking call the police. Hot take that I have when I'm really pressed on the point is that like I think about working towards aging as the big goal, kind of in the same light as Christianity. And so with aging, while that is the goal, and I truly believe that that is something that we can achieve, not only in general, but in our lifetimes, and I'd like to be the one to do it for obvious reasons. I think that even if we don't, I would be just fine, because the things that we will uncover along the way will still create immense value in the universe.
But why does aging matter? All right, welcome back to another Noble Lore podcast. I can't help but, kind of smile every time I do these. I get a little excited. Noble Lore podcast, and this podcast is brought to you by Noble Lore, my business. What does my business do? Well, if you have a podcast, then perhaps that you are passionate about toilet paper and you want to just tell people all about how awesome toilet paper is, but you don't know how to spread that message and you don't know how to articulate it completely clearly and to a broader audience. You come to me. You say, hi, Jack, I want to start a podcast. How do I do that? I say, you show up and talk. I'll take care of the rest. So, Noble Lore. Now I'm excited to introduce one of my very, very close friends of 2 years now, maybe a little over. This podcast has really turned into something that where I started, it was just going to be a way to generate business and get people involved, and while also showing off quality conversations. But what I'm finding is the first 3 podcasts that I've done now are people that I'm close with and that are my friends. And, it's just turned into something where I get to show off the people that I'm spending time around. It's definitely a flex. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Benjamin Anderson.
Well, thanks for having me on, man. I'm excited to be doing another conversation with you. I
am super excited as well. So I come into these with no plan, no questions, kind of prescript, prescribed. But I figure, we're close enough where our conversation will just go where they naturally will go. So, we kind of started off our friendship. Well, actually, I'd be curious, like, how did we start our friendship, and what was the kind of felt like the stars were aligning in that regard?
I think our relationship started off more transactional, because it was like, okay, here's a guy with interests that are overlapping with the things that we were doing at the time through the legacy interviews business, and that Vance is still doing, a now past guest of yours, right? And you had introduced yourself as someone that was interested in interviewing people in retirement communities in order to capture their life stories, and that was like basically exactly what we were doing at the time, not just retirement communities, but more broadly. And so not transactional in the sense that we were like trying to get something specific out of that, but like, oh, well, there's like an interest alignment here. There is something that we could achieve by, staying in touch and seeing what that might be. And so that was the thing that I think kept a consistent conversation going in the early stages. But as that conversation evolved, it became clear that we were both of a certain type of character where we wanted to spend time together personally. And so we did. And obviously, became a friendship.
Yeah. And then we had been doing some meetings and came together and we're like, hey, you were like, hey, I have my friend group is adult people, right? Like, 30s and 40s and 50s with families.
It wasn't me that said that. It was my fiance that said that.
Say more.
Well, my fiance comes to me, my girlfriend at the time, and she kind of jokes. She's like, or it wasn't necessarily a joke at the time. She was like, she was pointing out something that she wanted to see change. And she said, hey, I am the one who has most of the young friends to offer to our relationship. Most of the people that you do spend time with are in their late 30s, 40s, and, even on the higher end of the spectrum. And she was just making a point. She wasn't like, go out there and find young friends, but she was saying it a little bit more than jokingly. Like, it would be nice if you had some quality young people to also offer to our like sort of shared social network here. And so I'm like, gosh, who are the young people that I know that I could envision myself wanting to spend more time with on a peer basis? And yeah, that was like you and Colton were the first guys to come to mind.
Right on. So the last question that I asked Vance on the episode right before this was, what should young people be paying attention to, and what's the most important thing they should be paying attention to? And he said broadly that the person that you choose to spend the rest of your life with, the woman that you have in your life, or the man that you have in your life, depending on whatever, is going to be the most important decision that you ever make in your life. So you mentioned Olga, your fiance. How did you decide that she was going to be the most important person in your life?
You don't just decide that once. I mean, you decide that many individual times at various levels of like commitment, right? You decide after a couple of good dates that you want to keep playing the infinite game of going on dates and getting to know each other better. And then you decide eventually to ask somebody to marry you. And then obviously there are decisions that come after that about deciding to start families and things like that. And so I say that to say that there were many small decisions that I think over the long term, a good relationship is sort of like continuously having faith in the success of that relationship. Probably getting engaged and then eventually getting married more than anything else is like once we cross this chasm. That's one of the things that I love most about what I anticipate the rest of my relationship with Olga being, is that we both are of the mindset that while divorce rates, I think, for people amongst our generation are going up, not down. I don't know those stats off the cuff, but that's the perception that I've been given. We're both very much like, yeah, that's like not how we're going to roll. We're like in it, and at all costs. And so, I guess to your point of like, when did I know? Probably more so than anything, like, literally like a dream, I guess. A dream told me that like this was the relationship I was going to be in for the rest of my life. And I was like, that's a good dream. I would like to live out that dream. And so we are.
What makes you choose to take your dreams so seriously?
Positive feedback loops. And what I mean by that is that like having dreamt enough things, like I have my notebook pattern where like I wake up every morning and one of the first things I want to do is either, if I'm not going straight to my computer, which I don't do anymore for the blue light things, or for keeping the blue light out of my eyes right when I wake up, I'm at least jotting a zip file inside of my book. And what I mean when I say zip file is like 2 or 3 words that I can basically remember the whole dream to unpack later, so that whenever I'm like with my cup of coffee and behind the computer at the beginning of the day, I can like look in my notebook and say, there's the couple words that allow me to remember the dream that I did have. And then I'll riff that out in sort of my digital notebook system. And I say that to say, to your question in regards to taking dreams seriously, I have done that consistently for a long enough period of time that I have recognized serious patterns in regards to what dreams are saying about things that I'm thinking subconsciously, or things that my psyche wants me to be made aware of, or in the most woo-woo sense, things that haven't happened yet. And then like what I've started to recognize in my lived experience is that more often than not, when I get deja vu, it's not ambiguous. It's like, oh, I remember having this dream, and I can actually go back and search when I had this dream.
And I think a lot of people, like, because we've expressed that we similarly agree in that regard. And when I express this to other people, it almost sounds crazy to them. They're like, oh, it's just deja vu. And I go, no, it's I don't know what it is. I don't know how to describe it. It's something more than deja vu. That's cool. So on that same kind of topic of having some similar things, what we discovered is, I would consider us as kindred spirits, like,
very much so.
Pretty soon on. But we had all these different things that were like so aligned, like these niche interests that, when we're talking about Childish Gambino or whatever. And
we're both blushing just thinking about it. We did a thing where we were like favorite song, favorite movie, or favorite artist, and then it was like favorite song by the artist, and went like all the way down the line with like very, very specific,
super niche things. That you're like, okay, this is just strange. That what do you think that is? Because there is something that attracts, right? There's something about art that attracts different people to different pieces of art. And we're picking these niche things. What does that say about a person, when they're picking what they want to be focusing their attention on, I guess?
I think you probably, to some degree, pick art that resonates with you. Like, the story that comes to my mind to your question is another experience we had together. We went to that art show, and it's not the most expensive piece of art that I've ever bought, but it's probably actually my favorite piece of art that I've ever bought, which was this. I asked the artist, actually, I'm like, hey, is this? And it looks like a lantern in like a black space, and then there's sort of like tentacles off the lantern, but it looks like a lantern, and there's like a very, very faint flame inside of the lantern. And so I look at it, and I'm just seeing what I see. I'm like, oh, this is a lantern in a dark space with like some whatever. And she's like, no, that is this very specific type of squid. And I'm like, okay, well, tell me more. And she goes on to tell me the story of the art piece, and how it's part of a tarot card series that she's making, and that this specific tarot card was the Hermit tarot card, and how the Hermit is a character who is not just kind of like burly and held up in their cave and mad at the world, but the positive side of the Hermit archetype and like the tarot world is like the character who retreats into his sanctuary in order to collect themselves so as to, I don't know themselves better when they're out of the cave. And so hearing that whole spiel, that was just like, to your question again, like a piece of art that specifically resonated with me. And so I think that, yeah, people are attracted to art that mirrors something back to themselves that they might not have seen had they not had the art in order to represent whatever that was.
And to your point, oftentimes it could be subconscious, just,
Yeah.
Very similar to the dreams.
Yeah.
What's your sanctuary right now that you retreat to?
I haven't been able to go there. Well, there's one obvious answer. The sanctuary I retreat to is in my relationship. The place where I find peace is when I'm spending time with Olga. So that's like the cop-out answer. And if not for the work that we do down here, I really wish I was having the opportunity to spend more time with her now, but we're doing the long distance thing right now. But the other place, as far as like a sanctuary, is I grew up about 4 hours south of St. Louis in Nixa, Missouri. It's in between Springfield and Branson. So our family home down there is just tucked in the woods, and it's nice. And yeah, if I really, really need to like escape for whatever, I'll just go down there for a few days.
What is your interests? You're very tasteful. They're very unique, and I'm not going to gas you up too much and say they're like heightened taste in art and music and books that you read and so things. So I'm not going to gas you up too much, but they are unique to maybe what most people would show interest in. What is a kid from Nixa, Missouri, this little town? How does he get to being so eccentric? I guess is maybe one way to put it.
I don't think it's unique to me. Like a good friend I grew up with, I remember a friend named Sam, she at one point said, like, we were with our friend group, and you've since come to know like Tanner and Sean, and you haven't met our buddy Cole yet, but Cole's in the same category as a musician. And she said something like, man, there must have just been something in the water in Nixa, because we got all of these amazing artists and entrepreneurs that are coming out of there. Like my buddy Andrew I'd throw out as well. And at first we thought so to your question, the microcosm is not just me. I think that there's many amazing people that came out of where I came from. And then I had a model for a long time of thinking that microcosm was specific to Nixa, until I kind of, moved to Denver and lived there for 2 years. And then eventually I moved here 5 years ago, and we have our own microcosm here. And so what I'm getting at is that everybody has the, not just the potential, to your point, to like identify niche art and have, I don't know, different interests or whatever in a positive sense. But the unifying factor would be something to the tune of agency.
Say the unifying factor, something to the tune of agency. What do you mean by that?
People who want to maximize their variability of potential experience throughout their life.
People that want to maximize their potential for variability throughout their life.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It's like, okay, I am in Nixa, Missouri, and my free will, so to speak, is like a sort of, I don't know, people talk about free will, and I think that this is something that's sort of like is more of a function of time than like a standard value. Like your free will is of X value, and Jake's free will is of X value, and my free will is of X value. I think it's more like your free will is X as a function of time. And what I mean by that is that you are like right now, for example, my ability to do anything that I want to over the next 5 minutes is limited by the speed at which I can move, like the geography that we're in right now, the tools that I have on me at this exact moment. But if we expand that bubble out over the course of the next 6 to 12 months, I can do most things that I want to do. And so as a function of time, my free will is very, very high. And I'm fortunate to be in that position. And so when I say people who have agency, it's more like, people who, as time goes on, want to continue expanding the range of possible things that they could do further out into the future. And then maybe the things that make us unique, separate from, I don't know to what degree you've talked about it in your prior podcasts so far, but I know it's a subject that is of interest to you, is things like mimetic desire, right? Once you create the space and set your life up in such a way that you can really do most of the things that you want to do, most people don't actually escape the level of only wanting to do things that they see other people wanting to do, because that is like the low energy thing to do, is to say, well, other people with lots of money want sports cars, so I'll want sports cars too. Lots of people who have money want to travel, so I'll want to travel too. If you like set all of those things aside and you just say, what type of change do I want to bring about over the course of my life, then that's probably like the more positive thing to do there.
That's the question that I used to ask a lot of people was, if you never had to worry about money again, what would you be doing right now? And then I found that the answer was maybe not necessarily mimetic, but to some degree was. The main answer that you would think of is probably travel, right?
Yeah.
Like that is what most people would say. And so then I eventually switched the question up to that same question, but you also had to make an impact on the world. What are you doing to make an impact on the world right now?
Through the network of people that we cultivate, like the easy answer is downstairs in the space behind us. I'm working on understanding the biology of aging, and I want to make a serious impact in that space over the course of my lifetime. But what I'm actually more proud of is helping other people acquire and scale agency, and that is the work that we do through our men's group, which I would say is broader than a men's group now. It's really like a peer group, bringing about positive change in my neighborhood through development as well. Like that's a beautiful place that I want to see be revitalized. I mean, there are many small categories, but those are probably the main ones.
Yeah, you're developing, and you can explain it further if you need to, but you're developing houses north of the Delmar Divide, which is a big, nationwide known thing that people have known about for a long time. And basically it's the description of, you go one block over past this road that it's extending west to east, and so then you go over it to the other side of the train tracks, so to speak, and it's a poor black neighborhood, and then before that is rich white neighborhood. I mean, just so...
It was actually a rich black neighborhood more so than a rich white neighborhood beforehand.
Oh yeah? Say more.
Yeah. I mean, what I've come to understand about the history of the neighborhood is that it was still far enough away from sort of like the central economic hub, which was like the sort of hospital medical campus area that we're at right now. But that Fountain Park actually was the community that is where the sort of black wealth set roots more so than probably still the other side of the street where most of the white wealth was concentrated. And I'm surely there were some Caucasians that lived there at the time as well, but having lived in the neighborhood for 5 or 6 years now, that's the history that I've been made to understand. And I'm not surprised anymore, but over time just got surprised by how many people are like 6th, 7th generation in their homes, and like take that very seriously, and that's why they want to stay there. And they can tell stories about their like there's one person who lives in the park who was talking about like how their grandfather was one of the early engineers at McDonnell Douglas, and I don't remember the position they held there, but that was sort of like the thing that gave them the economic power to live in an area like that at that time, and how that was so many such cases like that.
When did that start to change? When did that
Probably more broadly with like the population decline in St. Louis. Like when you say that start to change, you just mean like the neighborhood going in a south direction?
Yeah. What time frame?
If I had to guess, probably like between the 40s and 60s and the 1940, 1960 period, because I think that's around the time that we hit like the zero tangent line in terms of like population peak in St. Louis. And as things like manufacturing and textiles like went the way, whether they went overseas or just in other areas, another big hit to us as a city was choosing to run like the national railways through Chicago instead of St. Louis. That took a lot of trade and like commerce that would pass through here as like the major gateway to the Midwest or gateway to the West City. All of that traffic was going through Chicago then. So
how did that decision get made? Was it that the people in charge, so to speak, were relying too heavily on the Mississippi River, or what made them decide not to do that? Because we had the option to do that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't have the history there. If I had to guess, I would say that they lobbied better for it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what made you decide to develop in Fountain Park, the neighborhood that you're currently living in?
I moved here from Denver, Colorado, 5 or 6 years ago now. And coming out from Denver, where like a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house in the city is like $1 million. I'm coming out here to go to the med school at WashU, and I'm scrolling around on Zillow and looking for places to rent. And like I don't have any context about the Delmar Divide. I mean, I've got some. We grew up, like I said, 4 hours south of here, and we'd come up to St. Louis like it was Manhattan, and be like, wow, like look at these big buildings, and that was like our world model. And I think it was my dad more than me. We'd like found an opportunity north of Delmar, but it was like a beautiful house and it was livable. Like I couldn't afford to buy it, but it was like, get a mortgage and like it would have been fine. Right. And so we go to look at that house that's in my neighborhood. And a nurse who lives in the neighborhood comes by on his bike and strikes up a conversation, says, oh, well, if my dad's a career construction person, and says, well, if you guys are handy and you're down for a project, I'll sell you this house on the other side of the street for $10,000. Like, that's a lot of house for $10,000. It's like a structural masonry, 2,500 square foot house. I'm like, this is great. I would love that. And so I would not have been able to do that without my father, is what I would say. But to your question about like wanting to develop that area, after seeing what we achieved with my house, so like I kept very close tabs of the finances that went into that, spent around $90,000 and a lot more in sweat equity in terms of like my dad and I putting in time in order to bring that into a position where it was livable. And it's still not done, but like hyper candidly, like most recent appraisal was nearly $300,000. And so there was like a lot of equity inside of that asset to then do something else with. And I had no debt on it. That was just like, instead of paying $1,500 a month in rent, I was paying, not gradually. What I did right when I landed was I got like 3 0-interest credit cards and just slowly maxed those out over the course of the 0-interest APR special for like 12 to 16 months or whatever. And so then I was like, okay, great. I've basically got a 0-interest loan for 25, 30K for the next year and a half or whatever. And so that's the money that was largely used in order to like bring the house into livable condition. And then through other opportunities, I eventually started to make some money, like refinanced that into a personal loan, paid that off, and then had other money to actually put into it. Between like seeing that there was value that was created in excess of the money that went into it in our house, and saying that like, okay, there's many other houses in the neighborhood like this. When I moved into the neighborhood, it was less than 40% occupied, as in like standing structures. And according to the census record, I was one of 8 white guys in the neighborhood. The most recent census record, I can't remember if it's 2020 or 2022, but I remember looking at it and I'm like, got it. I am one of 8 Caucasians out of 1,890 something people over here. I'm invested in that area. I want to stay there for a long time, and we've got some other projects going on over there. So it's both the financial opportunity and the point that at this point I'm bought into that neighborhood.
Does that mean anything? Maybe not even to you, but what do you think it means maybe to, I don't know, people in general, of being one of the very few white people in an all-black neighborhood? Like, is that significant in any way?
Oh, I'm a homie. I'm a homie for sure. Well, like yesterday, we were hanging out yesterday because like Central West End Halloween party. It's like one of the like I think it's really cool. Like they do a costume contest and then they kind of do like a music show afterwards. And yeah, it's just like it's a giant block party. We were hanging out there and we went back to my house at the end of the night. You'd gone home obviously at this point, but 5 or 6 of us are still hanging out. And got my neighbor Dax and we were kind of hanging out on the porch and we were going to go to Up Late, place here in St. Louis, and Dax and I have joked like for years about like playing around and like going out together sometime, and we never actually have. And so he ended up joining us at Up Late last night,
Nice.
my neighbor and his nephew, and yeah, like I guess in terms of like being a white guy in a predominantly African American community, I think it's fair to say that the people who see me as a gentrifier don't actually live in that neighborhood. It's whenever I try to interface with people in the city or, or with like other entities that don't have the context of like what I'm doing in that area that see me as sort of like the white guy coming in that's like trying to do things. But the people that I've gotten to know in that community know me to be a member of that community. And like, yeah, I have great relationships with people.
What
there.
are your neighbors seeing about what you're doing that other people are not, that the bureaucratic...
They're seeing freaking progress get made. That is like what they see. They're like, okay, Ben moved here and wasn't just like the white guy who bought a house and poked at it for a long time and then eventually like Section 8'd it and shoved someone in there so that they would have X amount of guaranteed rent from the government. He like moved into it in really, really shitty condition and with his dad and his sister sometimes like worked on it and brought it back to be like, I am the best looking house on my block if you drive down my block. And the people who live there appreciate that because, like I said, I've got like my 70-year-old neighbor across the street who's helped me out with a lot of stuff too. Like he'll walk me over tools and he'll give me advice and things like this. And he is that guy who's like, I'm still in this house because, 3 or 4 generations before me, this was my family house and I can't wait to give this house to one of my kids. And he's like, I've got 15 different like descendants, or whether they're nieces, nephews, or grandkids that I hope could take this house. Surely one of them is going to want it, and one of them are going to live over there. And so in terms of like what they see that I'm doing, that makes that relationship positive. It's like we're bringing about positive change in their area, and even the other projects that we're now doing in the area. I don't want to speak for everybody, but everybody we've interacted with, it's like we'll be in a project and like I still go do some of the work sometimes, but less so now because of the work that we're doing downstairs. It's more like my dad and other contractors. Like we'll have the door open and people from the neighborhood will literally just pull up. They'll come in and like want to see what's going on. And there's like a lady a street over from me on Aubert, and she's a teacher. And she's like, hey, my 2,500 square foot brick house has gotten to be a lot for me. You guys are bringing together like this 700 square foot basement unit. I think I'd probably like to downsize. Whenever you finish this, please let me know and I will move into that unit. And we're like, absolutely, And so like we're in the community. We're creating value for the community. That is why I think people look on us with a good light.
So when people shine a negative light on, let's say, gentrification, what is the argument that they're making for why it is bad, and how would you defend that in as much?
The largest thing, candidly, is probably like people ask me like, are we delivering low income or fixed rate? Like there's AMU, annual market. I don't know the acronyms. In any case, it's like there are incentives people take advantage of that are not me, in order to like deliver more units and have tax incentives in order to create housing in areas like this. And it's like, yeah, it's low income, it's subsidized, and it's affordable, right, for people who I would say the argument goes something to the tune of like, if you bring up the value of the neighborhood as a whole, things like property taxes go up, and other things like that, and people get, but I'd say property taxes are probably the main one that people are worried about, and we could go down a separate side path about how there are programs to subsidize increases in property taxes, so that's realistically not a huge problem either. But that's like the sense that most people get, is that if you create too much value in an area like this too fast, you're going to push the people out who can no longer afford to live in that area. And so that's like where a lot of that sort of negativity comes from.
Mm-hmm. I think when a lot of people hear your whole situation that you've just played out as far as living there and living north of the Delmar Divide, right? It's this big thing, and most people would be like, oh my gosh, I am way too scared to do that, or It's too dangerous, blah blah blah. What is your defense against that? Because you really haven't had any problems, right? I mean, you've had a.
I mean, it just depends. Like, I just tell people what's true, and I'm like, if that's not something you want to deal with, then yeah, don't do it. When I bought my house, it was like one of a couple vacant houses in the lot, and I would literally come home every single day, and there would be people sitting on my porch dealing drugs because I was a vacant house on the lot, or on the strip. And like my house, just because of where it was, like there was like no fence in the back, so they could pass through the gangway. Like that was where people hung out. And I remember calling my dad one time that I was there, and like there was like some shit going on in the front yard, and it wasn't like crazy chaotic, but there was like chaos directly outside my house in my front lawn. Right. And so like when you say, well, like everybody's got a line, and me, I was like actually, I don't want to say I was desperate, but like my financial situation was not robust. I was willing to forego a certain level of like comfort and living circumstances in order to take advantage of opportunity over a longer period of time, which is like what risk is. And so I was like in that mode, and I call my dad and I'm like, do I call the police? Like what? He's like, do not fucking call the police, because then you are going to be the snitch. Right. And so I'm like, okay, we'll just let this play out. And so I did. And, it's very little things, I think, that bring about the change in the way that like, it's like, okay, well, if I've got 2 or 3 dudes that are like in their late 20s or 30s that are like not antagonistic or not aggressive towards me, but a little bit antagonistic. Like they're skeptical. Like I am the white guy who's just moved into the neighborhood and I'm trying to do shit in their area. And they kind of like, give you a head nod when you come by, and it's little things like striking up conversation, literally like, hello, what is your name? Oh, your name is Troy. My name is Benjamin. What is your deal, Troy? Let's have a conversation. Well, this is my house. Yeah, you guys be cool. Have a good day. Fist bump. I'm rolling in. And then and then you install like a front porch light, and you leave a front porch light on at night. And it's like, okay, well, obviously you don't want to sit under my front porch light and deal drugs all night. You'll just go to like the other vacant house.
Yeah, right.
And that's like another thing. Like we ran a needs assessment. It was like on the neighborhood committee thing for a little while. And we ran a needs assessment for one time at one point. And in the back of my head, I'm like, obviously the number one need people are going to be calling out here is crime and safety. And this was an assessment for people in the neighborhood. Like we deployed it via like QR codes on postcards, and we did an event and had people like fill out the survey and stuff there. And of the 70, 80 responses or whatever we got, the number one issue is not actually crime and safety. It was vacant housing. And I was like, interesting. Why, like the community's perspective is that the number one issue to solve in the community is vacant housing. And in talking to people about why they selected that answer, the reason is because they know that the vacant housing is upstream of crime. Because crime isn't going to go hang out on your front porch. They're going to go hang out in front of a vacant house.
That's right. So your dad knew. And I'm thinking, I love that story because I'm thinking about, okay, if I called my dad up, like, what would he have said?
Well, he's a police officer. Yeah. What would he have said?
I don't know. I can't. He's a judge now. So, yeah. But he was also, a police officer in North City, and so he has a perspective that
might be nuanced,
and most people would never, ever begin to be able to think about, other than the people that live in those communities.
Ask him and let me know what he says.
I will ask him. So, how did your dad know to like give that advice?
He did the same thing when he was my age.
What do you mean?
I mean, he bought a house where like there was my dad. Like, I don't want to go crazy into my dad's story, but my dad literally had like his best friend get killed through things that were going on in that area. And so I say that to say that like he was actually in a really fucked up area in Colorado 30, 40 years ago. And he did the same thing. He bought like a dumpy house in this area because he like saw something nobody else saw, that over the long-term trajectory, this was an opportunity, and that the risk was worth it if he could endure the challenges in the meantime. And we still play a game to this day of like looking at that house, or my dad will pull it up, and this is like he bought that house for, I don't know, not to get into the numbers, but definitely less than $50,000, right? And he did the same thing where he like renovated it, lived in it, and that's actually what brought us out here. Is like whenever I was born, and we were in Denver for 3 years until my sister was born, and then that house was like a little crammed for 2 kids and a family, right? And so then the time was to leave, and they didn't necessarily want to go somewhere else in Denver. So they started looking around for places with good school districts. And that's how they came across Nixa, Missouri, Blue Ribbon School, whatever. And looked there. And I think like my dad sold the house in Denver at that time, which would have been like it would have been like 2001. Sold that house for $500,000 and then was able to buy beautiful cabin in the woods. That's like, yeah, big, beautiful cabin in the woods in Southwest Missouri. Right. And so just like traded into a different area. And we still look at that house now, and it's like, that's $1.5 million house now, literally. And so to your question, like, how did my dad know to handle that situation that way? I mean, he did the same thing when he was my age.
What do you admire most about your dad?
He is incredibly resilient. He fucking broke his collarbone this week and was like, no, we will just get through this. Bought him a bunch of bone broth, and he's been drinking bone broth, and like he's like holding water bottles and like stretching to try to get the mobility back there. And that's like hyper specific recent example. But first thing that comes to my mind, I mean, I could go for the whole hour on my dad. Another thing I admire about my dad is that he does not do the masculine ego thing a lot, where, you know, as a man, I think many men like will hold certain things back because they don't want maybe their kids or their wife or their peers to know about certain shortcomings in order to uphold the perception that they have of that person as like the head of the family. Like my dad is the head of our family, but he does not have that ego. He's like, hey, I made these financial mistakes, pay attention to them and learn from my mistakes. Hey, I made these mistakes in my relationship, pay attention to them and have better relationships than the ones that I had. Hey, I made these mistakes in my youth. Let me tell you these stories so that you can not make those mistakes. And so it's like, yeah, another big thing that I admire about what he's done as far as raising us.
Yeah, that's a question I ponder a lot of fatherhood, and, you know, if... because I don't know if I mean, maybe I would say that my dad does that to some degree. And I think there are pros and cons to each one. It's like, you know, in that, in him hiding it back, now I have to increase my ability to be perceptive and like, okay, well, what's actually going on here? It's I don't know. The idea of fatherhood is so ambiguous to me. Of like, how do you do that? How do you become a father? You know, like, what does that even look like? Because you got people like Marcus Aurelius, who has this book of wisdom of his reflections, and then he goes on to have Commodus, who was a cruel leader. I almost think that parents, specifically fathers, need to be flawed to raise good children, in a sense.
Well, everybody's flawed, and that's just the way that it's going to be.
Maybe deeply flawed.
Yeah.
To some degree.
Have you had someone in your life that has had a child, and you've been close enough to be able to like watch them and be in touch with them very closely over the course of raising that child?
Other than my sisters, you mean?
Yeah, other than your sisters.
Sure. Yeah, I maybe. I guess I don't.
Well, yeah. The reason I ask is because I would say maybe 3 or 4 years ago have been in your same boat of like fatherhood. This is like a black box in the back of my mind that like I don't know. I can like understand fatherhood from like my perspective as the child of a father, and like this is my world model of fatherhood. And probably one of the best things that made that experience seem way less scary to me was, again, to our mutual friend Vance, who you did a podcast with as well. Like right when I met Vance, he had just found out that he was having a daughter. And then eventually he had that daughter. And by that time, we were working together daily at his house in his basement. Watching him incur the challenges related to being a first-time father gave me models and observations to make it seem a lot less scary, and to the point of like everybody's flawed. It's like, yeah, everybody is going to have like challenges and things you need to figure out throughout that process. I think just having an example in your life where you're able to like see other people play out that process and like witness them in the struggles of it, but then also the beauty of it, like makes it to then that is a mimetic desire thing. I was like I say frequently, I had little to no mimetic desire for like the experience of raising children, if not for my relationship with Vance and seeing like the satisfaction and excitement and beauty that has come of his life of having had that experience.
Yeah, what he's one of the most intentional people about, I mean, really everything he does, but also specifically in raising children. Like, what have you observed of his intention? If people are watching this in chronological order, it'll be interesting to hear your thoughts. Or maybe what is one piece of the intentional way that he's raising his children that you will want to take away?
You can learn a lot about yourself through children is probably one thing. I mean, that's like the selfish answer of like, I will surely learn a lot about my inner psychology by like watching a thing that is at least 50% me bumble around in the universe and figure things out, and the heuristics that thing uses to figure things out in its environment that are separate from like the way that we cultivate it to make those choices for that thing will mirror something back to me about like what my more instinctual models are for making decisions in the world. And so that's probably like one thing that I've noticed him take from that in terms of intention. A less selfish thing is taking advantage of neural plasticity when children are young. Like if you ask probably either of Vance's girls at this point, he's got one of X years old and one of Y, like not to dox his children or whatever, but like they can rattle through like that tree is that type of tree and that tree that is that type of tree. And he's made them very, very aware of all these sorts of things that like now with smartphones and stuff, it's like people don't know what fucking types of trees or like constellations and stuff like that. Like that's an intentional thing that I would probably try to do as well.
There's your one boomer line for the interview with smartphones and things. I don't disagree. With that, with the idea of smartphones, the idea of mass communication going out everywhere, like what is something that is firing you up right now? What do you see in the world where we think about raising children in a world that is going to be, in some part due to us and most part due to things that are out of our control? Like what's getting you fired up and making you be like, you better not fucking have this in my children's life?
I've been telling people, to be hyper blunt for the sake of transparency, I've been like telling people recently that I feel more empathy for women who are single issue voters for female reproductive rights. And the reason that I say this is because in our current political environment right now, I'm like actually feeling tinges of anger whenever I am interacting with people that I know are optimizing for candidates that are trying to take away my rights. And so when we talk about I guess on the negative side of what's getting me fired up, it's like whenever there are people who have not to suggest that I have, but I mean, at risk of sounding arrogant, I do. I fucking look into shit. I do my own research. I get to the bare bones of it, and I'm like, what is going on at like base level, and like let me build my models up from there. And the more that I've done that, the more rooted I've become in my world model, so as to have enough conviction to like really push back on people that I'm interacting with that have models that are different from mine. It gets me fired up to answer your question when I'm interacting with people who, because they are not incurring the energy required to make sufficiently informed decisions, they are defaulting to the decision that social pressure is putting on them, which is a decision that will lead to a decrease in my net liberty and my family's net liberty in the future.
What gets you fired up in a positive way?
On the flip side of our current climate, I see people making decisions meritocratically again. This is getting me fired up. There are like organizations that have been making decisions based off of some of those same social pressures, and more I'm getting like hints in the things that I pay attention to and the people that I'm rooting for and the things that they're going for. They're getting those things, and this is firing me up in a positive sense because it means that to some degree the people who are able to create the most value are like getting in positions where like the most positive some people, not just the highest potential in terms of like I want more power or I want more money, but people like in our circle where it's like I don't want power or money. I don't want either of those things. I just want to like create beauty in the world over the course of my whole life. And other people like that I'm like seeing get into positions of very, very high leverage. And I'm like, yeah, that guy right there is going to be so good in ways that I can't understand because like I'm not totally in their world, but like, yes, I hope that happens. And more of those things are starting to come to be. And yeah, that gets me fired up in a positive sense. People in our friend group that are like you doing this and the success that you've created over the course of our friendship. You know, you joke you were selling pens when we first met, and now you're fucking doing podcasts with like the best people, like the best people in St. Louis.
That's for damn right.
Yeah. That fires me up. Or our friend, like I'll shout out Sean and Tanner. Like they're fucking making a movie this fall. That's awesome. I love that. That's so exciting.
Yeah, it's I mean, our group, which we call Perium, which is Latin for equals, like the people that we have in that room with us are just critical first principle thinkers and that are just fucking amazing. We have our friend Isaiah, for instance, that quit a job with like a very, very impressive company headed by a very, very impressive human being that most people would be like, I need to stay around him as long as possible. And he started his own business. Like this is...
Yeah.
Yes, that is it.
Nice.
It's that's like when I've been telling people this a lot. People think like starting their own business or giving themselves agency, but in a way to framework that people can understand. Starting your own business, they think that there are all these barriers to entry, and what about the taxes and what about these things and I probably should be ready for this and that. It's like, dude, I just fucking started my own podcast and then had people asking me to help with them with theirs, said I don't have time, they offered to pay me, and now I have a business. It's that simple. There are little things that come along that you're going to have to figure out, but it's that you can just fucking do it. You make value somewhere and then get people to buy it, right? Or buy into it, you know? It's so much, it's possible. I think that's really cool what we're doing as far as, showing people that. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, we're leading by example is all I was going to say.
Totally, yeah. The quote that you speak about a lot, the most powerful thing to do is give power away. Where'd you hear that from, by the way?
I literally knew you were going to ask me that question. Not because we talked about it. I like thought about it, so that's funny. And so I should have my answer preloaded, but I didn't. Good. It's kind of like a paraphrasing of a Kanye West quote, actually, in Kanye's song "Power," of which I'm sure you are familiar. No one man should have all that power. There's a line towards the end. It was actually a programmer of mine. So like in my prior business, we had a software company, and a programmer of mine that was like a very insightful guy is talking to me about like power and money and these sorts of things, and he was like one of Kanye's, and he was a Jamaican guy, so I'm not trying to like make fun of him, but he was like, I think one of Kanye's best lines comes from his song "Power." He says, "Do you got power to let power go? You got the power to let power go?" And he was explaining to me like the idea behind that, and how this was a guy who, and I was like, this is now again like probably 3 or 4 years ago, more than 3 or 4 years ago, and I'm like into lucid dreaming and stuff like that even back then, and this is why I'm being neurotic about dreams. That's how long I've been doing that for. But we're talking about lucid dreaming, and he was like, I have gotten so good at lucid dreaming that I don't want to lucid dream anymore. What do you mean, Marvin? He's like, well, once you get full control of your environment in a lucid dream in your own psyche as you can, you don't want to, like, what do you want to do? What do you want to do when you've got full control of like the world around you?
I want to have sex. Honestly, that's the first thing I would do in lucid. I hate to cut off your...
All right, but night after night, you're banging it out in your dreams. And enough time goes on. He's like, I want challenges. I want to seek new challenges. I want to create dragons, and I want to fight those dragons, and I want to slay them in my dreams. And he's like, eventually I oscillated to the peak of like capacity to lucid dream, and I've let myself fall all the way back down into like the world of like letting things happen to me again and knowing that I am stronger to face those challenges, because that is fun. And so that was what he was getting at. It wasn't from like the social sense of like the most powerful thing a man can do is give power away. But I think where that stems from, that quote, to like close the point, is the idea that if you truly have maximal power, the actual most powerful thing you can do is give power away.
This is you run the risk of giving that power away to someone who can't handle it. That is an inherent risk in that, but seems like to you your answer would be that's worth it. That's worth doing so anyway.
Yes. Yeah. When in doubt, we should alleviate constraints from people.
I'm curious what you think on this. This has been my thought process around voting as of recently. And it's like, yes, I can do as much research into certain topics as I possibly can to get the best possible vote for people that are putting together the best possible policies. And then in my mind, and I say this facetiously, but one egghead on the left is going to come tell me all of these stats and these things of why their perspective is right. One egghead on the right is going to come along and tell me why all of their perspectives and these things on these policies are correct. And so that is something that will cyclically happen, and it'll happen no matter what. And to me, I tap out and think, you know what? Let's just vote on a person that is of the most character and assume that they will surround themselves with the right people. And that could be a Democrat, that could be a Republican, could be an independent. I don't know. What do you think about that? Choosing that, or am I missing something in that I should be paying attention to policies and legislation more?
I've never thought of what you just articulated, but I think you made a really good point where what you just described is like when I say I get to the root of things to make decisions, I'm like, okay, yeah, not what is the article that is giving you like the one-line version of the data and the conclusion you should have, but like where did the like let's look at all the data. Like let's look at that data in the context of all of the rest of the data where they like snipped out that one piece in order to like make a point, right? So now let's look at all that data, and now let's look at where that data was generated and how and by who, right? Because they may or may not have had a motive as well, and if they did, like if we're like saying people that are against sort of like the Make America Healthy Again, the counter arguments to that, it's like, okay, well, both of these sides are funding work from a nutritional perspective to validate their existing perspective. And so then, yeah, how do you make decisions? Yeah, I think you made a really good point. That's like, you just want to back people of integrity. And so you say, who has more integrity here? And what team do I think is going to have better heuristics for making decisions in the face of chaos?
What has challenged your integrity in the last couple of years? Challenged in the sense of made you want to, maybe not even want to, but that urge to go a more straightforward, malicious route almost. Like what has brought that out of you?
I don't think it's unique to St. Louis, but corruption and bureaucracies for sure, because there are shortcuts that you are able to take. And those shortcuts are so clear that your attorneys will tell you that I'm not telling you that this is what you should do, but I'm telling you that if you want to get this deal done fast, this is the guy that you need to put X amount of dollars in their pocket and have him represent the project and have him go to this meeting as a representative of the project, and then your project will get approved. And I am reluctant to be a willing participant and signal to other people that are corrupt that like I'm willing to play their games as well. I would rather keep naively showing up with, perky, cute architect and my homie from the neighborhood and be like, all of our ducks are in order. Why are you not letting us do this beautiful thing? And like that challenges your integrity, because there are some times where it's like there are certain projects I've been working literally years to get done, literally years. And if I was willing to be more malicious or low integrity, those projects could have already gotten done, but then I would have damned myself for it.
What do you mean by that? Damned yourself for it?
To as much of a degree as possible, I would like to live my life in such a way where there's never a reason to tear down my statue. But morality can also change, right? You've met Haya, our friend who's like vegetarian. He casts his models very, very far out. He's like, we could live in a world in 10,000 years where they will tear down your statue for eating animals.
200 years.
Yeah,
even.
200. Yeah,
right.
200 years. They could tear down your statue because you were eating meat. And we just don't know. And so I can't make every decision right, but I hope I make enough right decisions that my statue stays up longer.
Is that important to you, legacy and your statue staying up?
well, I did co-found a business called Legacy Interviews, so I don't not think about legacy at all. Yeah, it is important to me, but it is not for like permanence of my ego. It is like for permanence of
The story that's being passed down. I
yeah,
would
the
imagine.
story patterns that if people live by those patterns, they too can live more beautiful lives than the ones they're living now.
So the phrase, if you can't beat them, join them, or finish the sentence.
Try play an entirely different game. Go play an entirely different game. We have these conversations too, where it's like that's the level of fidelity within which we're trying to figure out how to bring about positive change in our community. It's like, okay, well, do we appoint our people, or like not just appoint our people, but do we as our people go fill these roles in these existing systems, or do we just pretend that that system does not exist and build entirely new systems elsewhere? And in the case of St. Louis City, I don't know if we can do that yet, but in the case of universities, that is what I am doing. I'm like, I think we should just build an entirely different system that will catch young people and give them space to work on beautiful ideas that is separate from those pipelines.
Playing your own game. What is it that how are you doing that?
This is a long-term goal of the real estate endeavors. I guess the MVP that I'm running right now is that
MVP meaning?
Minimum viable product. Is that like, say, the space that we have access to. I've come across 2 other people that needed space like this in order to do their science. And I'd gone through kind of I didn't finish my program for biomedical engineering. I didn't even finish 1 year. And so I kind of had a long roundabout to being able to do science at all myself. And throughout that roundabout, I learned I was not unique in my experience. I was unique in my ideas, but like there were many people out there that for one reason or another did not find themselves within like the university pipeline, and they had good ideas and are looking for places to work on those ideas. And like, I guess just to say what the university is supposed to be, or maybe the PhD is a specific example. Like I understand the purpose of PhD to be like, let's take a smart young person who's accumulated enough of the existing context through undergraduate and graduate program and give them the opportunity to work on a thesis. Some programs are better than others, so this is not a blanket statement. But more and more, I'm talking to motivated young people who like have an actual unique idea that they want to work on, and that's what that system is supposed to be for. Like for you to plug in somewhere and have the resources and the mentorship in order to work towards discovering something that nobody else has ever discovered before. And so then you write up what you've discovered and you present that data and you defend your thesis, and congratulations, now you're a doctor. That is like how the system came to be. The way that more and more of the system is working now is that you're a young person who has ideas that you went into school because you wanted to pursue. For me, those ideas were the biology of aging, right? And many such cases, aging is a big problem. There are many young people who want to work on these ideas as well. And controversial statement is that the reality is that most of what's being worked on in academia right now is actual bullshit.
Why?
Well, we actually played this game like during one of our team meetings just this last week. It was like, okay, well, let's look on the whiteboard and say, what percentage of all of the work that is being done right now do we think is bullshit? And then let's break down the different categories of bullshit. And so we have the category of bullshit of this work is like actively fraudulent, or p-hacked, if you've heard of any of these terms, where you're like, there are indications and statistics for what statistical significance of results look like. And so you can sort of like pad the barriers of the way that things fleshed out in order to make your results seem more statistically significant than they were. And so to more broadly answer your question of why, it's because if you get funding from a grant or a sponsored research agreement or a family office that wants to donate to your domain of science, and you go to explore a path that turns out to yield not substantial results, people are aware of the fact that if you don't like achieve something positive, it's basically like not achieving anything at all. Like there is not achievement in having narrowed in the search space and coming up with nothing. And so people don't want to have to go to the same people who funded them the last year and say, well, your last grant didn't yield me any results. But please give me money again because I have a different idea now that I want to pursue. people like get more and more rooted in the bullshit of an existing path that is yielding no results, because they have to like, whether they're doing it willingly, it probably starts off like a little bit subtle. I mean, yeah, whether they're doing it willingly or not, I think there's like that category of bullshit. Then there's the category of bullshit of like, do these results even matter? There's a really interesting guy who's on Substack. He actually left his academic position at, I want to say Columbia, New York, a guy named Adam Mastroianni. And he kind of makes this point consistently across his writing that so much of the work that's being done and funded is like, okay, if we're spending hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars or whatever dollars in order to uncover X, what would we do differently if we understand X or if we know X? And that's not to say that we shouldn't do any science that is totally motivated just by filling out like the knowledge graph of all the way that things work in the universe. But like, there's lots of work that's being done in order to just uncover increasingly minuscule like bits of information that like are not going to dramatically change the way that things work in the world. And so that's probably like less bullshit, but also still like broadly speaking in this category of bullshit as we were laying it out. And then there's just misinterpretation of results, like honest mistakes. And what we genuinely came to, whether we're right or wrong, I encourage people to reach out and challenge us, was that like we probably think that 98 to 99% of the work that's being done right now is bullshit. And the purpose of the conversation that we were having was, of course, like there's a guy named Mike Johnson. I really like his writing as well. It's on opentheory.net. But he makes a point in one of his pieces that's like the only antidote to bullshit is good taste. Yeah. And so if you have like a good sense of like what good ideas are, like there's some like qualia driven like aspect to that where you're like, this is capturing my attention, my curiosity, and I don't have a firm causal model for why, but I'm going to dig into these things and see if there's something at the bottom. And like the people who operate like that more often than not tend to find out that there are good things at the bottom. But let's zoom back up the conversation, right, to go into like the PhD thing of like many PhDs are not being given the freedom to truly explore their ideas in order to contribute something new to the domain of science. They are finishing their undergraduate and their graduate programs, and they're going to try to find an opportunity to do their PhD that has funding and resources and tools and mentorship to do that. And they're landing there with their idea, and the person who gave them that opportunity is saying, that's not the idea you're going to pursue. You're going to work on this idea. If you want to be in my lab using my resources and a portion of like my grant funding or whatever, like this is what your PhD is going to be on. And so you have like the divine light of like curiosity in a young person. And like you can go back and look at like there's all these articles that have been written about all of the most productive periods in history for like scientists and innovators and entrepreneurs. And it's like that critical period of like, say, like 20s to 30s or whatever. And we are like totally snuffing that out because of the way that things are working right now and the ways that we've been talking about. And so, yeah, I'm like, generally speaking, super interested in finding ways to, over time, I want to do more of this, but to whatever degree I can, find opportunities to like give people like this access to space to pursue their ideas, so long as they don't care about having a PhD in order to like, you know, validate the fact that they've done that. It's like proof of work, not proof of stake.
Well, we'll continue down this thread, but you said a couple things in there that interest me quite a bit, because the idea of taste and developing good taste, because it seems like I don't know if one of them is divinely given and the other is, you know, almost mimetic. It's like I saw this person that created art that a lot of people resonate with, and this is what I think they did. And so if I want to develop taste in art or movies or cooking, I follow that thread. But do you think that you can develop taste?
Yes. Yeah.
How so?
Try stuff in the arena. To use like, I don't know, the meme terminology, I would say like, there's a poem or a like written thing that's called The Gap. Someone had written it, like maybe you can link it in the show notes or whatever, because I can't remember the person who did it. It's Ira something. Someone literally just sent it to me. And it's talking about sort of the angst that artists feel whenever they are trying to like create work that is like to the level of standard, where it's like, do you know artists in your life who are working on things and they're never satisfied with the quality of their work?
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And so, the idea is that continuously, like, there's no way to just, without trying things or trying to create new art or iterating, putting in reps. The point of this, like, it's not a poem because it's not written poetically, but it's very brief. Like, we'll find it and send it to you. The point of the thing was basically like, yeah, you've got to put in the reps. And over time, like, if you analyze the reps that you put in for why it is not meeting like that internal, whatever it is, that like motive force of like the thing that you're trying to get at, then perhaps this is the way to develop taste. And so in science is probably a harder metaphor for what it looks like to develop taste in this domain, but it is also probably something like doing experiment after experiment after experiment in the lab to see what works. And like, we as a company are a little bit different than an academic setting, because like, while I have investors, I don't have grantors that I need to go back and get on my knees for next year or in 2 to 5 years or however long the grant period was and say, hey, I asked for this grant so that I could explore X, and like, if X didn't turn out to be true, go back to them and explain that and then ask for more money. Like, we have the opportunity to pivot. Thankfully, we haven't had to pivot yet. We seem to be on the right track, but we'll see if that continues to go our way over time. But what I'm getting at is that, like, we have the, like, our responsibility is not to like figure out the thing from a grant. Our responsibility is to like create value for shareholders. And so like, my mental model as the CEO of what we're doing right now is that, like, I've got X amount of dollars in the bank. If I can spend, say, $500,000 over the next 6 to 12 months of our total runway, I will still have a substantial amount of money left. And like, I will, like, my goal is to completely falsify or reach a given milestone within the next, say, year for that amount of money. And if we get there and we identify at the onset what our fail state is and we are wrong, then we will just have X amount of dollars left and say, like, okay, what is our next idea? What is the next best hypothesis that we can come up with?
Can you say what that milestone is? Like, if
Yeah.
you have it in?
In increasing the yield of stem cells during something called cell reprogramming.
Okay, so we'll get into. So you have a company. This is what
Yeah.
we're getting into, baby. I'm gonna put my brain at maximum cylinder here. So your company is called Ion,
Yes.
and it is, you said, maximizing the production of stem cells within a process called cell reprogramming.
If I'm being like maximally transparent, which I feel comfortable doing in a conversation with you, the purpose of Ion is to show people that magic is real. The next most narrow thing under that is the purpose of Ion is to solve the biology of aging. And then our next most immediate milestone from that is that as a proof of concept towards the mechanisms that we believe can achieve those other two bigger goals, to increase the yield of induced pluripotent stem cells during this process called cell reprogramming, where the way that I usually introduce it to people with like less of the context of the development of the field is, do you remember how like 10, 15 years ago, it was like part of the public conversation, whether it was like ethically right to harvest stem cells from embryos?
I remember the controversy of it,
Yeah.
but I want to take a step back real quick as far as like, let's go get into as much clarity as we can give to this. So what are stem cells? Why are they important to the body?
Stem cells are important in the body because they have the ability to differentiate into any other type of cell.
Meaning, what does that mean?
Like, I have a stem cell. The thing that makes stem cells valuable, not just in the body, but in the marketplace, is that if you're a researcher and I want to do very complex research on this like type of neuron or like these type of like liver cells or this type of cell, instead of having to extract that cell, like say you have a disease and I want to figure out the nature of your disease, and that disease is in your brain, and for me to understand your specific disease as it pertains to all of the things that make you, like specifically like your genomic profile, we can do one of two things. Like without stem cells, we can look at all of the other people who have that disease and all of the data we've been able to generate, whether it's from other patients, and like maybe they've died and we've been able to harvest their cells, but you have this specific neurodegenerative disorder. Like we can take your cells, like let's just say your cheek cells that are very easy to obtain, and we can expand out that culture and then have a bunch of cheek cells that are specific to Jack's genome. And then we can do cell reprogramming to de-differentiate. Well, you can either do direct reprogramming to turn those cells directly into that cell type, or for some cell transitions, we can de-differentiate them to stem cells, and then we can turn the stem cells into that other cell type that we want. And so stem cells, generally speaking, are valuable in personalized medicine for that reason, but then also for like people who get stem cell therapies, like if you get stem cell injections for areas of the body that it's, purportedly if you have a higher concentration of stem cells and maybe like a ligament injury, this can increase like the rate of healing to that area. I'm actually personally less familiar with stem cells as like it goes to harvesting them to re-inject for personalized medicine. I'm more interested in the cell reprogramming technology as it pertains to increasing the yield of it because of like our longer term goals. But ask me questions where it didn't make sense.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you a whole bunch of dumb questions. In this process, you've created a culture. Are these something that you can store? So if you take the cells from my cheek, the stem cells within my cheek, am I describing that right? The stem cells.
You're not taking the stem cells from your cheek. We're taking the fibroblasts is the fancy word for skin cell, like a skin cell, and we're going to take some of those cells. We're going to put them in conditions that allow them to grow and reproduce,
and then those can change to, if I need a knee surgery, those same cells could go into my knee and fix my knee. Is that
after turning them into stem cells?
Okay, so after turning them into some stem cells, and in between that is cell reprogramming.
Cell reprogramming is the process of reprogramming a given cell type to a different given cell type.
Okay, so you're reprogramming these cells.
Yeah.
And then what is the process by which you are doing that?
Well, the process by which we are doing that is, I think, the thing that makes us unique as a company, because I would start by saying what most people are doing. Like the analogy I give is that most people in science are trying to control the individual. We are trying to control the crowd. And so what I mean in the sense of like, say, a cell culture, when I'm talking about controlling the individual cell, the way that we achieve reprogramming is increasing the expression of 4 very specific proteins called the Yamanaka factors. And there are others that have since been discovered, but predominantly those are the ones that everybody knows about. And so we increase how many of those proteins are inside of all of the individual cells in that culture, so as to get some of the cells in that culture. And we don't like, that's like the state of the art. We're generally speaking trying to figure out why. And there's like a separate tangent on the state of the art is more reliant upon creating high throughput machinery or like processes in order to narrow in all of the possible permutations of the known universe for like other combinations of either transcription factors, which are these special proteins, or different chemical combinations that can get cells to do that. But like, so I say all of that to say focus is generally speaking on modulating individual cell. What makes our strategy different is that what we are focused on is what are the intercellular signaling mechanisms that the cell culture as a whole are using to coordinate towards the shared goal of let's be fibroblasts or skin cells now. And this is what we don't know yet. This is what we're seeking to find out. Can we modulate those intercellular signaling patterns in our cell cultures and not need to worry about micromanaging the individual cell states in order to more effectively reprogram cells into a different state?
Okay, I'm going to try to describe a metaphor here and tell me if this resonates with what you're doing or not. If you want the most simplest way I can put it is, you are the people that you spend time around, right? And to some degree, you're saying that you can put cells that may not be optimized for reprogramming into a culture that the culture then decides what is going to happen to this cell.
That's not directly what we're doing. What I would say that I think the better metaphor is something like it's easier to control a crowd than it is to control an individual. And so instead of looking at like all of the cells inside of a cell culture like they are individuals in the crowd and saying like we need to understand enough about individuals in general in order to control every individual in this crowd. We need to change the way that information is disseminating into this crowd, or the signals that the crowd is using to coordinate towards whatever the crowd is there to do. And can we modulate that pattern of information exchange in order to more effectively get the crowd to do something? And this goes back to Girardian philosophy as well, too, right? Like controlling the mob.
Right.
And so, like, it's very hard to control Jack, but in order to, like, control you, if I really wanted to control you, I would probably control the people that you are spending time with. Yeah. I would seek to say, like, okay, well, let's change the mob behavior.
Let's change the mob behavior. So now I'll expand out to culture as a whole. If you want to control a mob, would you not put a charismatic leader at the front of that?
Are we still talking about science? Or are we
we're
talking
still
about the
talking
mob?
about science, yeah.
That's an idea that one of our advisors had. We had a conversation with the guy that was like, well, why don't you just try seeding stem cells into your cell cultures of fibroblasts and see if you have a higher concentration of stem cells already in the culture, that if you can get more of them to dedifferentiate. And there are two reasons that we didn't pursue that. One is the fact that I would describe like think of it like a hill, and the hill represents like an energy gradient, and at the top of that hill are stem cells. Like stem cells very, very badly want to fall down the hill and differentiate into any different number of cell types. And so if we put stem cells into a crowd full of, like, they're going to be like an individual in the crowd who doesn't have strong priors. They're just going to default to what the rest of the crowd is doing. And so if, to your charismatic leader point, however, if we take like a different cell type and we put it into a culture of stem cells, then that's going to be more of like the charismatic leader, the one that's like down that energy gradient. And so that's like reason one why we are not pursuing that strategy specifically. Reason two is going back to the maybe more interesting and general conversation for like the focus of our work, is that I believe that this is part of a series of different challenges that we can solve exploiting this mechanism in nature to like actually solve aging, whereby solving aging is like achieving some rejuvenated effect in cells to get them from a more aged phenotype to a more youthful state. And so the reason that seeding method is less interesting to me is because if I'm thinking about like how the work fits into the broader roadmap of how this could translate to something where we actually are able to put you into a system where we are rejuvenating all of the cells in your body, the lower hanging fruit is not going to be doing like micro injections of stem cells all over in your body, but it's going to be some different fuzzy thing. The analogy I like to make is like back to tanks from Star Wars is like what's in my head when I'm thinking about the long-term roadmap of our stuff. It's not a drug. It's not a gene therapy. It's probably going to look something more like a back to tank or an MRI.
Yeah, I love that. Or, the Green Goblin and Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Okay, so then why, I imagine I can imagine a culture of people that are like, oh, well, you're playing God and blah, 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 which I think is silly. It's like the people that made cars were playing God to some degree and everything that we are around. But why does aging matter?
It matters to me because it's possible. And it matters to me because I think many people are constrained by time. Like if you had more time to bumble around in the universe and figure out what it is you needed to do to maximize your value in the universe, that you might feel, and pressure is good, like the fact that we do die at some point, but that will never go away. Even if we truly radically solved aging, then like there would still be chaotic events, like you could be hit by a car, or like hurricanes and just all kinds of crazy stuff can still kill you. And so like there's that aspect of it. Another like I guess hot take that I have when I'm really pressed on the point is that like I think about working towards aging as the big goal, kind of in the same light as Christianity. And what I mean by that is that like in Christianity, you are like working towards the goal of being more Christ-like. Like we want to emulate the behaviors of this character, and we might be comfortable with the fact, because those sins are forgiven, that we do not need to fully emulate that character, but there is nobility in the process of working towards that goal. And so with aging, while that is the goal, and I truly believe that that is something that we can achieve, not only in general, but in our lifetimes, and I'd like to be the one to do it for obvious reasons. I think that even if we don't, I would be just fine, because the things that we will uncover along the way will still create immense value in the universe. Like, say, the work that we're doing right now, if we can make like cell reprogramming, this process I'm talking about is generally speaking less than 1% effective. So if we've got 10,000 cells in culture and we're trying to de-differentiate those into stem cells, like, you're going to get 100, however many, to de-differentiate, and then those will become colonies, and you have to select those colonies and go on from there. And so our initial market opportunity is just licensing that technology to an existing stem cell manufacturer distributor, or manufacturing them ourselves, which I'm less interested in. But then, like, point two is that, well, if we're working towards aging, we don't want to turn you into a blob of stem cells. We want to do that partially. Right. And so once we solve the challenge of how do we go from a differentiated state all the way back to a stem cell, which is theoretically at like the cell level, the more youthful cells phenotype, how do we do that partially? How do we go from like 1 not to 0, but from 1 to like 0.75 or 0.5? And where's the local optima for like where you want to be in like peak rejuvenated state at a cell level, and then make that holistic. And so, like, my next target modality, there's already some work being done in the space. There's a paper that came out less than a month ago about how we took stem cells, we turned those stem cells into B cells, which are a special cell type inside of your pancreas that produce insulin. And then we injected them into, I think it was a 24-year-old female patient. And they'd been in that patient for a year producing insulin, so that because type 1 diabetes is the one where you like repeatedly need to take insulin in order to alleviate the diabetes, right? And so theoretically, this is a cure for diabetes. And so I see things like that as other promising endpoints. So I'm like, the work that we're doing right now, in terms of like having a marketable modality where we can proceed down a trajectory that works us towards our long-term goals, while at the same time delivering value along the way. Because that's what a lot of people in the space do. They're like, please give me hundreds of millions of dollars so that I can like solve aging sometime. And I bring this up a lot, and that's not, again, it's not a blanket statement, but I go to conferences and these sorts of things. It's kind of like, if you've seen The Big Short, there's the there's the scene of they're not confessing, they're bragging. And this is not just longevity bioscience. This is like a lot of bio, where you're in these certain settings and people are kind of whispering like, oh, I know this one CRO. A CRO is a contracted research organization. I know this one CRO in China, man. You tell that CRO what you want the data to look like, they'll make the data look like whatever you want it to look like. And then you can move on to clinical trials and whatever and so forth. And so what I'm very much not interested in doing is grifting. I'm interested in like actually delivering value along the way. And so, to your point of like, why does aging matter, to bring it back to that, it's like, even if we don't achieve aging, like, I am continually trying to think of opportunities to create value in different like sort of steps along the way that would be beneficial. But yeah.
I think that's wonderful. And if I were to steelman the argument of what does aging matter, it's to maybe a more digestible way of understanding it is, imagine if Einstein had 1,000 years to do his research, or imagine if Picasso had 1,000 years to,
And I can steelman the other side just as easily, because people are like, Einstein didn't contribute a ton of value the latter portion of his life. Like Einstein delivered on general and special relativity, and then Bohr and others delivered on quantum mechanics. And Einstein was very adamant about this idea that like God doesn't play dice, and that those two models did not reconcile. And there's like a different tangent on science that I think is like more interesting there, about how like this was kind of like the big deviation where we kind of broke away from truly innovating in the space. But like he was very, very stuck in those ideas and didn't contribute much. And like, Einstein's amazing, but didn't develop many new ideas after. Going back to that idea we mentioned earlier of like, there was a critical period where most of like the contribution was done, and then afterwards it was more like trying to find ways to reconcile those models for a grand unified theory. But maybe the best was already behind him and others in those types of situations.
When you think about the general idea of living forever or living 10 times longer than you could, or whatever that number is, how would you spend that with your fiance, Olga?
Well, we would travel a lot, obviously, to bring it back to the beginning of our conversation, right? Yeah, there's like many things in the world I want to experience, and that we would want to experience together. There are many problems that I think that we want to solve together, and I hope that over time we continue to find ways to solve problems together. To like skyhook what Olga wants to do long term is add a greater emphasis to beauty and like long-term stability and sustainability and like design and building. And the way that she wants to execute on that is by having a structural masonry design build firm where Jensen Hong Vance sent me this talk from Jensen Hong where he talks about how if you want your company to be further ahead and be more valuable on a 2-year time scale, hire PhDs, because they'll have all of the knowledge in order to get you there within that initial critical period. But if you want your company to be more valuable and further along on a 15-year time scale, then not telling you not to hire PhDs, but ahead of hiring for the PhD, you should hire people who are motivated by the mission and capable of solving problems at all costs. And so going back to with Olga, when it comes to, say, real estate, many people in real estate are operating on that same 2-year timescale idea. And so this 2-year window of return on real estate investment has narrowed us into this box of using cheap materials. And one of the things that Olga wrote very early after we got in touch, she wrote an essay when she was at WashU that was we're kind of thinking about sustainability all wrong because we're measuring sustainability by the energy that goes in to make the materials, but we're not thinking about the fact that these more sustainable, quote unquote, materials that are erecting these current structures will only really last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Whereas, if we are willing to incur the energetic cost of using less sustainable materials, things like masonry, we see structures all over the world that were built with masonry that have been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, right? And so our culture has strayed away from that. It is important to her to have us steer back in that direction and understanding the value of that. And I think that's a beautiful mission. I'm super excited for her to finish school and find ways to work towards that. And so I say that to say to your question, we have our own separate missions, but I think we will find things that are important to us that represent ways we want the world to be different together in positive ways and work on those things, find patterns for achieving them.
What's the most important thing that young people that maybe are watching this should be paying attention to right now?
I think it's less what they should be paying attention to. And the thing that I would truly encourage young people to do is stop paying attention to anything because the harbor is burning down. The universities are failing. Our government is failing. Other institutions, generally speaking, are on the downward slope. And so what I would say is as someone who's gotten way further than I ever thought that I would be able to get by not finishing school, by just dropping all priors and saying, what is the path of least resistance towards my goal state? I would say, stop paying attention to what everybody else is doing, release yourself from mimetic desire, and identify where you want to be, who you want to be, and the path of least resistance for getting there without any priors at all. Do art in blank space.
Amen.
Amen.
Benjamin Anderson, thank you so much for coming on, my friend.
Thanks, buddy. Love you too, man.